Welcome to Psychology of the Daf. We are in Gemara Pesachim, Daf Yud Ches. Now, this Gemara mentions a hermeneutical principle called Dayo Labo Minadin Lios Kanidon, which is, to explain it simply, when you make a kal v'chomer inference. A kal v'chomer inference is when one understands a certain rule or restriction that applies to a lesser matter. We say surely it will apply to a more serious matter. Now, the principle of Dayo Labo Minadin Lios Kanidon, limits the application to only something as severe as the originating rule. Now, stay with me here because even though it's technical, we'll give an easy example. So, let's say I say all American citizens must abide by a quarantine. Kal v'chomer, surely those non-citizens with student visas must abide by a quarantine. Now, theoretically, I could even suggest that if citizens are required 1 week of quarantine, surely non-citizens that come from countries that are less evolved with healthcare, etc., surely they should be required an even longer quarantine, maybe 2 weeks. Comes along the principle of Dayo Labo Minadin Lios Kanidon, and it says that we cannot extrapolate additional days beyond the original rule. So then, even non-citizens are quarantined for only a week. Now, the Gemara in Bava Kama derives the principle of Dayo from an incident where Miriam in Chumash was smitten with teras, with leprosy, after criticizing Moshe. Even after Moshe prays for her healing, Hashem responds that though he will heal her, she will have to be banished for 7 days. After all, God says, if she were rebuked by her own father, would she not feel banished for 7 days? Now, what does that really mean? So, the commentaries learn from here as follows, that if you think about it, actually the Gemara says it explicitly, the Gemara over there in Bava Kama says explicitly, that why just 7 days? It should be 14 days, because isn't it much more severe to disrespect Hashem by saying Lashon Hara about Moshe, his greatest servant, his greatest prophet? So shouldn't she get an even longer punishment than 7 days, perhaps 14 days? And the Gemara says, you see from here again, Dayo Labo Minadin Lios Kanidon, that even if you're making an inference from something less severe to something more severe, the more severe item only holds on to the originating law and not something more strict. The commentaries do raise a question, though. Where did the Gemara come up with the number 14? Why didn't they say 10 days or 100 days? How do you know if you're going to do something more severe, how severe it should go? Where did they come up with the number 14? So the Ramban over there just simply answers that it's typical to double. And so it's a figure of speech in a certain sense, or it's an expectation, but really maybe it would be more. Tosfos gives a different answer, and he says that since a Mitzora, the actual one who gets tzaras that we learn about, aside from Miriam, the quarantine periods happen in sets of 7, so if it would to be more severe than the original 7, it should be 14. Now, no matter what, we see that there is an ancient version of quarantine. And while I'm not a fan of claiming that we know why God does what he does, Corona can be about anything. Still, it is something to ponder that perhaps the various enforced quarantines that the worldwide community is experiencing may have the same attributions that our sages teach in regard to tzaras. The Gemara in Arachin, Daf Tes Zayin, Amud Aleph, tells us of a number of sins that cause tzaras. So you can take your pick which one to work on. Rabbi Shmuel Bar Nachmani says that Rabbi Yochanan says, leprosy comes to afflict a person for 7 sinful matters: for malicious speech, for bloodshed, for an oath taken in vain, for sexual immorality, for arrogance, for theft, and for stinginess. Take your pick.